for us to receive and gain more wisdom. Look over our campus and our community as we work together through our challenges as well. Father God, open our hearts and minds so that we may receive and understand the knowledge that's presented on us tonight. But more importantly, my God, send us out to be more committed in our communities, so that way we may become stronger and wiser and more aware of our surroundings. God, I just ask for now that you just bless over tonight and you just bless over the rest of our days. As the children of God, we come together and say thank you, my God. Amen. Amen.
Good evening. My name is Jalen Fellows, and I'm a first-year student majoring in business administration from Dallas, Texas. Welcome to Brain Food, the Dillard University President's Lecture Series. Dillard has a long history of being a cultural and intellectual hub of the gentility community, and we are striving to be the place where all of New Orleans comes for discussion of critical issues. Thank you for being here with us tonight. At this time, please take a moment to ensure that any electronic devices, including cell phones, are either silenced or off. After the lecture, and if time permits, you will have an opportunity to engage the speaker during the question and answer period. We know there is excitement after the speech and many people want to participate, but we have one simple request. Ask a question. No speeches, no commentaries, no short stories. Questions can be asked in 30 seconds. If you cannot fit your question in the 280 character of a tweet, you know it is too long. Please cooperate, or we will have to pull the mic and escort you kindly to your seat. Our series sponsors are the Hyatt Regency New Orleans, Bolette College Bookstores, and Sodexo. We'd like to thank them for supporting this event. The program will proceed as printed.
Good evening. My name is Renee Simeon, and I am a first-year student majoring in political science from Lake Charles, Louisiana. Dillard University was founded in 1930 through the merger of two schools, both founded in 1869. Straight College, founded by the American Missionary Association, which is now the United Church of Christ, and New Orleans University, founded by the Methodist Episcopal Church, which is now the United Methodist Church. In a cross-cultural collaboration, these different denominations, along with the citizens of the city, pooled resources for this new university, which opened its doors in September of 1935. As the university developed, it made history along the way. Dillard University is home to the oldest speech and theater department for any historical Black college or university. Dillard boasts two signature academic programs. We are the nation's second leading producer of African Americans with undergraduate degrees in physics, not just for HBCUs, but all schools. Second, Dillard has one of the few HBCU film programs with students not only working on a number of independent movies, but television shows like NCIS New Orleans. Dillard alums have made their mark in the media as well. Locally, Kelly Brown and Christy Coleman can be seen on the morning news shows. Lisa Frazier Page is a former editor at the Washington Post and now a New York Times best-selling author. Brandis Griffith Friedman is a correspondent with the Chicago Tonight, and Evan Anderson anchors the news in Oklahoma City. Dillard will celebrate 150 years of excellence in 2019. Over the next 18 months, we we invite you to learn about the jewel of gentility, Dillard University, as we celebrate 150 years of education, advocacy, and service. Please welcome the 7th president of Dillard University, America's socially conscious hip-hop president, who is still traumatized by being in the Oval Office with that man, Dr. Walter W. M. Kimbrough.
Good evening. All right, one more time. Good evening.
Good evening.
Thank you. In 2005, I started the Bless the Mic lecture series at Philander Smith College. It was a way to engage the community with a wide range of topics in a city that really didn't have many signature events. 13 years later, the series still goes on. Last week, they hosted entertainer Ray J, who enjoyed his experience so much that he decided to enroll this spring. So I guess they'll do Love and Hip Hop Little Rock, but we'll have to see about that. But one of my commitments was always to try to present a diversity of political views. I balanced Ann Coulter with Michael Eric Dyson, Charles Murray with Cornel West, Mary Madeline with James Carville. This was especially true during election years. Our speaker tonight spoke at Bless the Mic in October of 2007. It wasn't an election year, but we were hosting all of the UNCF presidents that night. Now, normally when a campus hosts, they do a reception, have the choir sing, and then do a campus tour. But I wanted to do something that was more substantive. So after the preliminary events, we were treated to a lecture by our speaker tonight on the heels of his 6th book, Enough: The Phony Leaders, Dead-End Movements, and Culture of Failure That Are Undermining Black America, and What We Can Do About It. I ended up using that book for my honors orientation course because it provided lots of great discussion and debate. And so when I heard he had a new book coming out, a way for me to balance the idea presented by Kanye's former bestie, Candace Owens, and because it was entitled, What the Hell Do You Have to Lose? I knew this was perfect for a post-election conversation. In his latest book, our guest asked, what will it take for America to get back to doing great things and leading the world in the right direction? Is the political partisanship, the rise of racial violence, the discontent on the broadening economic divide a sign of a greater underlying issue in the United States? If it is, what needs fixing first? Juan Williams is one of the very prominent figures who is trusted to take on this in a fair and accurate way that invites all of us to care again. One of the country's leading political writers and thinkers, Williams has made his career a model of meeting in the middle by working as a reporter for NPR and the Washington Post and as a political analyst for Fox News. With 3 decades of experience reporting from Washington, he is considered one of the nation's most reputable political analysts, unflinching in his dedication to informing and challenging the American public. He has interviewed numerous Washington power players and elected officials, including Presidents Obama, George W. Bush, Bill Clinton, George H.W. Bush, and Ronald Reagan, giving him a unique vantage point on America's constantly evolving political climate. Williams is also a great storyteller and an incredible inspirational speaker, a true class act. He is repeatedly one of the top speakers in America, using facts and relationships, not speculation and rumor, to discuss our political future. As a representative of the collective whole of America, Williams understands that business and government must work together and balance each other to create more employment opportunities while maintaining our society's integrity. He understands the needs of industry as well as the remaining economic and social issues still plaguing our country, and he uses his inside connections to power to provide straightforward, unapologetic, and truly unforgettable presentations. So please help me welcome tonight's brain food guest chef, Juan Williams.
President Kimbrough, thank you so much. What an honor to be here at Dillard. I love that prayer. That prayer was so special for me on this day. sometimes when you're traveling, it doesn't stop family emergencies and things from going on. So I sincerely appreciate it. And the introduction was terrific. It could have been longer. He could have mentioned that I was my high school valedictorian. So what if I was homeschooled? That doesn't matter. Normally when I have the opportunity to speak to an audience of thoughtful young people, I like to start with humor in order to develop the relationship so that you can know I'm real and that what I want to say to you is real. But tonight's topic doesn't invite humor. To me, to talk about President Trump and race is no joke. It's serious business. And to tell you the way I feel, to just give you a sense of the depth of feeling I have on this topic, I never imagined that I would have to write this book, Dr. Kimbrough, this book 10 years almost to the day after President Obama was elected, the first black president of the United States. I thought the country was headed in a different direction. But as I stand here today in 2018, there's no getting away from the reality that the President of the United States, the current President of the United States, is dividing us by race, exciting white nationalists, putting down black people, Latinos, immigrants with foul language from the biggest bully pulpit in the world. And his racist policies, and that's the heart of this, the racist policies are scaring me. Do you remember Charles Dickens, since I'm in an academic setting? Remember Charles Dickens' description of 18th century Europe after the French Revolution? He wrote it was the best of times, it was the worst of times. Now to me, that's a good description of being black in 2018. Because I'm 64 years old. And in my lifetime, I've seen the first black billionaire in the USA. I've seen the first black chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. I've seen the first black Secretary of State, the first black president of the United States. I've seen musicians, from Michael Jackson to Kendrick Lamar, rise to the very top of American popular culture. Black athletes from Shaq to Stephon Curry to Colin Kaepernick, all over TV advertising for all kinds of products. And I've seen black actors like Denzel Washington and Jennifer Hudson win Academy Awards. I understand that you recently had here some of the actors from Queen Sugar. Again, you've seen this kind of representation of black life in a way that really was unimaginable when I was your age, when I was a young person. So I can keep going. More black people are currently serving in the U.S. Congress than ever before. In fact, after this last midterm, again, a new record has been set. Black high school graduation rates, all-time high, and more African Americans getting their college degree. Thank you, Dr. Kimbrough. But scratch the surface of that reality that I just described to you, which sounds like the best of times for black America, and you find something altogether chilling. A nation recoiling at watching the KKK and neo-Nazis march in Charlottesville. Appalled that black people still have to remind everyone in the wake of deadly police shootings that Black Lives Matter. Just ask the 64% of Americans who told NBC this year that racism in America is now a major problem. Just ask the 77% of African Americans who told pollsters again this year that they have a negative view of race relations in our country. That's a sharp rise, about 30 points from the 44% that they said they felt negatively about race relations just 3 years ago. In fact, There was a Fox poll about a month ago that said 58% of Americans disapprove of the way that President Trump handles race in this country. And again, another poll, this one by Politico, said 55% of Americans think race relations have been made worse by President Trump. And here's the kicker. Here's the one that's really easy to understand. It's tempting to go deep into this one, but I just put it out there because I think you should know it. I don't want to go too deep into it, but I think you should know. 49% of Americans of all races say that they believe this president is a racist. A racist, outright. Now, you know, people generally don't even like to call him a liar. They don't want to put a tag on him and say he's deceitful. But here you have half of Americans telling pollsters that they believe the president is a racist. So, to my mind, it's hard to deal with this awful reality. This is the other side of the good news of being black in 2018. You stop and think about it. Why are people so troubled by race relations at this moment? How did a country that's made so much progress on race and so much so recently fall so quickly back into a deep hole of racial division and regret? Now, standing here at Dillard, given that we're doing brain food, I assume that most of you know the answer. The cause of this regression is none other than the rise of Donald Trump. He's the one who built his political career by trashing the first black president, Barack Obama. He questioned whether Obama was even an American citizen. He then followed that so-called birther movement by starting his campaign for the Republican nomination in 2016 by calling Mexicans criminals and rapists. He has attacked an American judge as being incapable of doing his job, of simply looking at the evidence in a legal case because the man's parents were Mexican immigrants. And of course, you all know that Trump has recommended that Muslims be banned from entering the country until the courts manage to pull back on such a rash ruling. I don't have to remind you as I'm standing here, because I'm sure you look at the papers, you listen to the news, watch the news, that he's called black NFL players sons of bitches because they wanted to kneel in protest during the national anthem. He's tweeted that a black woman was acting like a dog, and he responded to that terrifying display of white supremacy that I mentioned to you earlier, the one in Charlottesville, by saying that fine people were on both sides. And remember, both sides were neo-Nazis, white supremacists, versus people who were protesting and saying, this is un-American and shouldn't be happening, and somehow to him, both sides deserved respect. So it's Trump, with his mockery, his contempt for black people, who asked white voters what these black people had to lose by voting for him in the 2016 presidential election. He first used that phrase, what the hell do you have to lose, at a campaign rally before a nearly all-white crowd in Michigan. He described black people as a people unable to see that by giving their votes to Democrats, they ended up with trash-filled streets, neighborhoods with high crime, bad schools, and no jobs. Now, obviously, that's a wildly inaccurate portrait of how most black people live in America today. Contrary to that dire depiction, the reality is that most black people today are in the middle class. You know, it's kind of shocking that President Trump has no idea that it's more than 40 households earn between $35,000 and $100,000 a year. Another 12%, so in addition to that 40%, another 12% of Black American households take in between $100,000 and $200,000 annually. So you put that together, and it's pretty clear that Black Americans are either securely in the middle class, without regard to race. I'm not talking Black middle class, I'm saying middle class, or beyond. And yet his preference is always to talk about the poorest Black people. And in fact, he likes to exaggerate it, to hype it. During the campaign, he would talk about 56% of young Black people being out of work, unemployed. In reality, it's 16%. The reality is Black men and women have led some of America's most successful companies. Stop and think about it. Just stop and think with me. McDonald's, Xerox, Time Warner, Merrill Lynch, all companies that in recent years have had a Black man or woman as their chief executive officer. But again, Trump doesn't seem to notice this. He only wants to talk about poor Black people, and of course, here's what I think. He wants to do this because he wants to present Black people as a problem for white people. He doesn't want to talk about hard-working Latinos, people working 2 and 3 jobs to try to make it. He wants to talk about Latinos killing white people. He has no interest in an accurate picture because it doesn't serve his political ends, his political purpose. And that's why you have to remember that when President Trump declared that Black people have nothing to lose by voting for him, here's the trick. He wasn't talking to Black people. He wasn't addressing a Black audience. He wasn't in a Black neighborhood or a majority Black city. He was talking to the anxieties of white working class people in ex-urban Michigan. He was speaking about their fear of poor Black people, their fear of immigrants, of Latinos, as threats to move into the neighborhood, a threat to mug them, to take their jobs, a burden on welfare and other social entitlement programs. He made himself, for his political purposes, into the hero standing at the gate, keeping the barbarians at bay, so that these people could continue to live their lives. To me, these are insults that fit with Trump's campaign slogan, "Make America Great Again." That line was an attempt to create, to me, white nostalgia for the 1950s social hierarchy. White men at the top, women of all colors below them, and of course, Black people at the bottom. Black people fit into that picture only as content, happy-go-lucky folks, singing, dancing, no problem living in segregated neighborhoods, broken down segregated schools, no political voice, no voting rights, segregation in terms of employment accepted, and of course, no political power. That's why Trump's "Make America Great Again" slogan remains political dynamite in this society. That's why those red and white hats are so controversial. That idea, "Make America Great Again," is celebrated by who? David Duke, former head of the KKK, as well as by the alt-right Proud Boys white supremacists. It's a flashing signal of white opposition and resentment against the nation's racial progress over the last 7 years, but certainly opposition to the growing political voice of people who could elect a President Obama. Let me stop here and make this personal. Because, you know, the period of racial progress for black people, let's say over the last 70 years, just to pick a time frame, 1950, 2020. That time frame is an amazing fit with President Trump's lifetime. He's 72 years old. He's had a front seat to see everything I've just told you about. All the amazing progress, all the people who have made breakthroughs in terms of black opportunity and achievement in American life. Yet he talks down to black people and the other people of color when he tells these audiences, again, overwhelmingly white audiences, that black people have nothing to lose. In other words, you got nothing because you got nothing to lose. In the world, according to Trump, the success of minorities in America has come only at the cost of the forgotten white man. Trump claims to speak for these people, especially those over the age of 55, who tell pollsters they feel like the country is changing too quickly, too many immigrants, too many black and brown people moving ahead, possibly pushing them out of economic opportunities, not to mention the tremendous rise in the Asian population, now the fastest growing segment of the American demographic. Trump's words are an explicit call, therefore, to white identity politics. His logic is based on historical distortions of America as a country made great only by white Protestants, and now those good white people are burdened by the poor, the uneducated, the immigrants, and criminal blacks. This is his presentation. This is his language. This is his logic. Trump's words, especially after that march in Charlottesville, have made for a simple-minded, made-for-TV debate question. Is Donald Trump a racist? And as I said to you earlier when I was citing a poll number that indicated 49% of Americans of all races think that he is a racist, I don't like to go down that hole. And I'll tell you why. So many people close their ears. Close their ears, don't want to really discuss anything once you say somebody is a racist. It's like, oh, I don't think so. I don't want to hear that. I don't want to discuss that. You've made up your mind. It's a conversation stopper rather than an invitation to real discourse, to honest debate. But the question comes up regularly in news coverage. It's inescapable these days in American cable news because the president on his Twitter account or in his interviews is unending in his attacks on black and brown people. LeBron James. LeBron James is dumb, and he's so dumb he makes Don Lemon look smart, says Donald Trump, and he's already said that he thinks Don Lemon's the dumbest man on television. He says immigrants coming from black and brown majority nations come from, and because I'm here at this good school, I won't say what, but it's S-hole countries. That's what he thinks. And of course, Maxine Waters, the congresswoman, soon to be head of the banking committee in the House of Representatives, he says Maxine Waters is a woman of extraordinarily low IQ. It's unbelievable. I told you what he said about the NFL players. He says that gang members, the Latino gang members, are a bunch of animals. And he says that they represent the idea that the country is being overrun by criminal immigrants who indiscriminately are killing white people. And he regularly then introduces people who have been victimized by a gang member or immigrant as angels and says these are the good people who are suffering at the hands of these immigrants, falsely framing an argument in such a way as to invite not only derision, but hatred of immigrants. You know, I couldn't help but noticing that the only time President Trump had anything to say about Africa is recently when he tweeted that white South Africans were having their property confiscated and that they were being killed in record numbers by black South Africans. Now, by the way, so that you don't get confused, you should know, in Trump terms, that's fake news. It's not true. But again, I want you to notice, it served his political purpose because it was a claim from right-wing conspiracy theorists that fits with Trump's claim that there's a war on white people going on. But again, I don't want to go down that hole about is Trump a racist. It seems to me it doesn't take us very far, and I really want, in the spirit of brain food, for you to think and engage this conversation. Because this is a conversation that is so critical, not only to your education here at Dillard, but to the life that you will lead after Dillard, to the careers that you will have after Dillard, to the spirit, to the genius that you can display to America. You have to figure out how to deal with this element of American life that is so raw, so sensitive, so outrageous, but so real, as revealed by President Trump. This is the difficulty. But the way I think to engage your minds, the way that I want to draw you into this conversation is to say, let's forget about quick and easy labels like racist and look at the policies, the actual policies being promulgated by this administration. To my mind, these policies really are what the hell we have to lose. It seems to me that all of you, for example, in the aftermath of what we have been experiencing in places like Florida and Georgia with the midterm recount, should have some idea of what we're talking about when we talk about voting rights. And what we talk about when we talk about issues of voter suppression, gerrymandering, what we're talking about when someone says don't count absentee ballots or don't count ballots in a neighborhood where the machines may have been working and where the lines to get to the voting machines were too long. You know anybody who might say such a thing? I think we know who I'm talking about. But I want you, as young people, to also have a sense of what we have to lose. And it's not just that Andrew Gillum might not become governor of Florida or Stacey Abrams governor of Georgia. The way I want you to think about this is by thinking about whether or not you know the name Bob Moses. Bob Moses spent the early 1960s putting his life at risk in the backwoods of Mississippi to defy the white power structure by registering black people to vote. In order to vote at that time, you had to pass impossibly difficult voter registration tests that effectively barred black people from the polling booth. That kept all real political power in the hands of white people and kept black people in a subservient role as close to the old days of slavery as possible. By the way, those white segregationists held political power right here in the South, a region whose wealth was built on black slave labor, free of cost except for the spiritual cost of engaging in brutal oppression of human beings, and of course, in direct contradiction to this nation's founding promise that all men are created equal. Even today, or tonight I should say, there's so many people who want to minimize that history, Recently, when Michelle Obama spoke at the 2016 Democratic National Convention, she faced criticism for pointing out that she, as the first black woman to serve as First Lady of the United States, lived in a house, the White House, that was built by slaves. Her critics replied that those slaves were, and here I'm quoting, well-fed and had decent lodgings, end quote. And I guess that was to excuse the idea that you were keeping people in chains, breaking apart families, denying them economic opportunity, and of course denying them education. That truth about race in America is just the start of what we have to lose. The same denial of blatant racism attaches to recent efforts to suppress the black vote. That's why we wanted you to be aware of who Bob Moses is and what he has done. In the 1960s, civil rights workers like Moses had to fight the lie that black people were happy not voting, happy living separate and unequal lives. You may have heard of some of the brave young people who stood up to fight that lie. And I'm thinking here not only of black people, but I'm thinking James Chaney, Andrew Goodman, Mickey Schwerner, two of the three white, but they were part of Freedom Summer, going down again to challenge the white power structure. And what happens? They're stopped by local police in Mississippi. They end up abused, tortured, killed, pushed into an earthen dam. Right at the start of the 1964 Freedom Summer. And in keeping with the denial of the harsh racial realities, there's a recording of a white Mississippi senator, Jim Eastland, telling the man who was the president at the time, Lyndon Johnson, that the triple murder was nothing but a publicity stunt by Northerners who were troublemakers. Again, the idea that our black folks down here, they wouldn't be up to anything like that. Of course, Chaney was, in fact, a black Southerner. That horrific tale is just part of a larger story of black people trying to register to vote at the risk of getting shot by night riders, burning crosses on lawns, guns being fired through their windows, and of course, mortgages being pulled by banks, jobs being lost. This is all part of the reality of an epic struggle for black voting rights in this country. Remember, it was in this violent environment that the NAACP leader in Mississippi, Medgar Evers, was shot and killed with a bullet to the back, fired by a Klansman in 1963. So when Trump, who was alive during this period, when Trump asked, what the hell do you have to lose? Keep in mind the decades of tremendous sacrifice made so that you can vote, so that I can vote, so that black people can be setting a record this year in terms of the number of black people in the Congress of the United States. That's a lot to lose in my opinion. And standing here at Dillard, I gotta say, blacks, Latinos have a lot to lose when it comes to education. There was 150 years of struggle before Brown v. Board of Education in 1954. The old Confederate states of the South responded to the Brown decision with violent, massive resistance, openly intended to stop school integration. For example, and again, Dr. Kimbrough, Arkansas, it took President Eisenhower, a Republican, sending the 101st Airborne to Little Rock in order to defend the rights of those 9 black children that wanted to go to Central High School, the Little Rock 9. And in 1962, James Meredith, an Air Force veteran, had to face down literally hundreds of white supremacists to enroll at the previously segregated University of Mississippi. The federal marshals protecting Meredith were attacked with bricks, guns, even toxic chemicals found in the school's chemistry lab. A journalist covering the event, a Frenchman, Paul Dillard, was shot and killed by a bullet to the heart. So too was a young white jukebox repairman, Charlie Berryhill. He was shot in the forehead while trying to escape the mayhem. A World War II veteran serving as a federal marshal said that night he was more scared than he had been when he was in the Navy on a destroyer in Pearl Harbor and the Japanese were attacked. That gives you an idea of the depth of violence that was being used to stop one man from attending the University of Mississippi. Now, the sacrifices I just described to you and the obvious, tremendous, I would think of him as a martyr, the tremendous work done by James Meredith, it really, again, is the baseline for what we have to lose. Because 50 years later, 13% of Ole Miss's undergraduate population is black. In the fall of 2016, about 11% of the students at the University of Alabama, meaning over 4,000 students, were African American. In 1962, they had no black students. By the way, 14% of Harvard University's freshman class last year, African American. So, Mr. Trump, that's what the hell we have to lose. And all Americans who believe in racial equality have a lot more to lose with you in the White House. My point here is to stress that real people, black, white, male, female, Southerners, Northerners, lost their lives, put themselves at risk in order to achieve extraordinary gains that have allowed America to come closer to its promise of racial equality for all. But again, that doesn't fit in to Trump's set of alternative facts. He says race has nothing to do with attempts to change the law so that, in fact, fewer black people will vote. Nothing to do with changing the location of polling places. Nothing to do with gerrymandering. Nothing to do with calls for shutting off the vote and claims of voter fraud, even when his own commission can't find any evidence of voter fraud. I hope you remember that he had a commission at the very start of his time in office trying to justify the idea that he said he would have won the popular vote over Hillary Clinton, which he lost by about 3 million, by the way. But he said that was only as a result of voter fraud. So he creates a commission to find the voter fraud, and the commission can't find anything. They can't find anything. And eventually the commission is disbanded. But the movement to stop black people from voting goes on. And as I mentioned recently in Georgia, before this last election, there was an effort to close down seven polling stations with the dubious explanation that the bathrooms were broken. And so we have to close these polling stations. Just so happens they were in poor black communities. So again, Trump's intentional blindness to the sacrifices made in the name of racial equality, these play into real policies that are having real impact on politics today, on your level of opportunity going forward, and the kinds of lives that you will lead as young people in this country. In an infamous meeting that Dr. Kimbrough was mentioning, or somebody mentioned that you were at the meeting with President Trump in the Oval Office when he said, yeah, come in, we're going to work. You know, it's almost as if he was saying President Obama hadn't done enough for historically black college universities. So I see the opportunity to divide the black community, because I'm going to say, here I come. All these people have complaints and criticisms about Donald Trump, but I'm going to get the black college presidents to come in here, and I'm going to show you I'm going to do more. And what happens? Well, as you know, Dr. Kimbrough, I'm sure, has told this story. People come away and they say, well, there was a photo op. We had a wonderful photo op. We had good times. got to talk to a lot of important people. But in terms of actual increases in the education budget, I'm not just talking Pell Grants. I'm talking the promise was we're coming to Washington and we're going to do so much more in terms of spending on black education in the country. Hasn't materialized. That's part, again, of the story. And it was mentioned earlier about Kanye West being invited in. Jim Brown, the famous Jim Brown football player, being invited in. People say, well, Juan, you're so harsh on this president. He has friends like Kanye West. I understand you had Candace Owens come here to speak. He's got friends like Candace Owens. And again, I say, he takes pictures with people. He uses people as props. But let's talk about the actual policy. Let's talk about what's really going on in Washington and how it affects your real life. And that's where, again, I ask you, as people who are educated here, there were people with critical faculties, to consider the power of politics in this age and how race is being used to divide, to pit people against each other, but also to distract people so you don't see that while we might be arguing about whether or not Trump is a racist, with the other hand, there's real damage being done. Real damage being done to the policies and procedures and protections that we as Americans should enjoy in this country without regard to race. One other thing before I bring this to a close and take your questions. Housing is so important. And sometimes people forget this, but when Donald Trump was a young man, his father was a rich apartment building developer in New York. And Daddy Trump did not let African Americans move into his housing units. In fact, Daddy Trump once reportedly marched with the KKK. He was arrested with them. They don't know if he was a member of the Klan. And you know what's interesting about this story? He wasn't marching against black people. He was marching against Catholics. Recent immigrants who were Catholics were seen as totally under the control of the Pope, ignorant, lazy, all of those horrible kinds of stereotypes attached to them. And here's Trump's father marching against those people coming into New York. And not only that, it had a financial bottom line to it, because his argument was that the presence of those people drove down property values. Oh, I think maybe a light bulb's going off in your mind, because you know what? That's exactly what he said later about black people moving into his properties. Drives down the value. So this is not racism. I'm just being a businessman, and I'm just telling you it's not good for business to have black people living in my properties. Well, it seems to me that Donald Trump may not know it, but during the very same years that his father was teaching him that racism was good business, there was a man by the name of Robert Weaver who was rising through the ranks of the federal government as an economist and making the fight for black housing rights in America. When the first public housing units were built, Weaver ensured that there would at least be space for black tenants, even if they had to be segregated. Later, he worked on the Supreme Court cases that made restrictive covenants illegal in this country, and he would go on to serve as the first Secretary of the Department of Housing and Urban Development, which he pushed to create, by the way, in 1968 with the Fair Housing Act. I'm telling you Weaver's story because, again, as is the case with Bob Moses, as is the case with James Meredith, I'm telling you that people put themselves, their careers, their very lives at risk in order for the progress that we have made in this country. And that is what we have to lose with Trump in the White House. And yet Trump pays little attention, I think it's no attention, to this argument about the need for equal housing rights and protections. He was actually sued. You should know that Trump and his father were sued by the Justice Department for refusing to allow black people to live in his buildings. And in the settlement that was reached, he was forced not only to advertise rentals in black newspapers, but also to inform major black civil rights groups that there were apartments available in his buildings and to seek out black renters. Thus far, he's run his administration in similar fashion, I should say. In 2015, President Obama had initiated a policy requiring districts that receive block grants from HUD to do assessments on how they can better promote fair housing. In hyper-segregated cities like Philadelphia, DC, that would mean figuring out how to get more blacks and whites to live near each other. Well, guess what? President Trump has stopped that initiative. Again, we can argue about, is he a racist? But you gotta pay attention, don't get distracted. There are real policies being put in place that are doing very real damage. He's also recommended eliminating community development block grants, the Home Investment Partnership Program, and Choice Neighbors. All of these programs designed to improve housing and encourage business growth in the big cities that Trump talks about so frequently. So, I want to close by saying to you that I wrote a book now 30 years ago called Eyes on the Prize, America's Civil Rights Years. And oftentimes, when I'm asked about that book, and I'm so proud of it because, you know, it's a rare book that stays in print for 30 years. But I would say once a month, maybe once every 2 months, someone calls me or someone sends me an email to ask a question out of this book, because it gets used not only in places like Dillard, but it gets used all over the country as a basic text in terms of teaching history now. So I'm very proud of it. And over the years, over the course of this 30 years, I see different questions emerge because the politics in the moment presents different racial issues for us to consider. But the one question that remains above all others is, why did you call that book Eyes on the Prize? And I tell them it comes from an old gospel song that goes, keep your eyes on the prize, hold on, hold on. I know the one thing I did right was the day I started to fight, hold on. And what I'm saying to all of you at Dillard tonight is that you have to understand that your education here puts you in the fight. You are aware people. You know, in the parlance of today, you're woke. You should know what's going on. You should not get fooled by arguments about, is he racist, is he not racist, oh, I don't know about this, I don't know about that, oh, did you hear what he said or what he tweeted? I want you to pay attention to the actual policies. I want you to pay attention to the consequences of those policies. I want you to be aware of how policies that were put in place even by Republican presidents, not just President Obama, Republican presidents, are being undone by this president. So you, with your education, become like an artist working with clay, shaping what's to come. But I don't want you to get distracted. I don't want you to get tired. I don't want you to lose your sense of purpose, because sometimes politics can be so exhausting. To the contrary, I want you to keep your eyes on the prize. Thank you all very much.
All right, we're going to take a few questions. Maddie's going to hold it down for me. So if you have a question, come over here. And I want to make this, even as some of you leave, make sure you get a copy of the book. I want to make sure that everybody knows the books are courtesy of our speaker. So he's providing the books for you. So hopefully you'll make sure you'll read and have conversations afterwards to get into more conversation about that.
Yes, sir.
You're not from CNN, are you?
Kimbo because I miss Candace Owens, and I gotta say that you're keeping it like you're channeling fair and balanced. And for all these young people here, I really love them because in about 3 more years when they're gainfully employed, I will be getting my Social Security. My question for you is this, and this is put on your journalist hat. Do you think that Bob Woodward was right in how he addressed that situation with about Jim Acosta and CNN?
Again, you know, that's very similar to the kind of presentation I just gave to you, because what Bob said is, don't play into Trump's hand when it comes to saying Trump is being unfair to Jim Acosta and it's Jim Acosta versus Donald Trump. Instead, pay attention to what he's actually doing. Write more in-depth stories about his actual policies and what he's up to, about how he is conducting not only domestic affairs but foreign affairs and falling short. But I don't think it's fair to Bob Woodward to somehow think that therefore he is endorsing Donald Trump's behavior and calling the American press and people like Jim Acosta enemies of the American people. I don't think Bob Woodward's saying that, and I think that a lot of people who are Trump supporters think, oh, well, if Woodward is saying that's a mistake, it's okay. I hope you noticed that today, or was it yesterday, CNN sued the White House to say they don't have a right to take the man's press pass. And Fox News joined CNN in saying, that's right, you can't do that. But again, what you get into, if it's just a war of personalities, if it's just Jim Acosta versus Donald Trump, then you get to pick a side, again, very divisive, but very intentionally divisive, and you say, oh, it's either I'm a Trump fan or I'm a fan of the American media and outlets like the self-aggrandizing Jim Acosta. I don't want you to get locked into that argument. I don't think it's a valuable argument. The valuable argument is when you realize that Donald Trump wants you not to trust anything you read that's critical about him, and instead to say, oh, it's just that Trump-hating press again. And suddenly you're not thinking for yourself, you're just picking sides. I think this is extremely damaging to our ability to see clearly. He throws up fog so constantly. I don't know if you've heard this term gaslighting, but it means that you essentially aren't sure what's true and what's not true. I'm reminded of what the Russians did in the 2016 campaign, where they played directly on racial divisions in the country. They would pretend to be radical black people, even, in order to antagonize white people. I mean, it's unbelievable. But again, that's gaslighting. That's you going online. You don't know where the source of information is. You don't know who's saying what to whom. And you suddenly get locked into, do I like CNN or do I like Donald Trump? I don't think that's taking us anywhere. So I would just advise you, pay attention. And let me just finally say that I am a journalist. I don't have to put on the hat. And the idea that journalism and the business of journalism, because journalists are out there trying to get people to buy newspapers and watch shows and listen to the radio, that suddenly would be called into question in America in 2018 is just so disappointing to me. I don't understand how it could be. I never thought we would be here, but that's the truth.
Hello, my name is Jemiah Robinson. I'm a political science major, sophomore from Chicago. And the question that I have for you is, you mentioned the drastic increase of progressive people of color into Congress, and one of the main topics of discussion in politics today is the impeachment of Donald Trump. Do you believe that the impeachment of Donald Trump should be prioritized over infrastructure and educational reform?
No. I'll tell you why I don't think that. I think that the odds are limited that you would actually get him out of office in terms of impeachment, because the Senate remains in Republican majority hands. So even if the House voted to impeach Donald Trump, it would be up to the Senate to remove him. And again, I just don't think that that's reasonable, a reasonable expectation. The second thing to say is the politics of it. that a direct attack on Trump puts us back into on pro-Trump or on anti-Trump. And people then lose sight of the constant bullying. I mean, you know, I didn't mention this, but I should have mentioned it in this speech. The FBI this week said there has been a 17% increase in race, hateful kinds of violence in this country, and a 37% jump in terms of anti-Semitic violence in the country over the last year. It's that kind of thing that's being encouraged, emboldened by this president. So if you get locked into, oh, I'm for impeachment or I'm not for impeachment, I think, again, you are distracted from the damage being done to the very foundations of the country. It's like this argument over the recount in Florida. The idea that Trump would be suggesting that they should stop counting legitimate ballots undermines the faith and credibility in the election process, the basis of our democracy. And again, the idea that the President of the United States would be undermining our democratic foundations, it's an abomination to me. And I just hope people see it for what it is, instead of arguing over, well, I wonder if that lady who is in charge of the vote in Broward County is doing a bad job. The courts have said there's no evidence of fraud, no evidence of malfeasance, no evidence that she's violated anything. And yet you have this argument going forward, and people like Senator Marco Rubio, who I have a lot of respect for, somehow joining in and saying, yes, because it's brutish politics, all about simply winning at any cost, including the cost of trust and confidence in our democratic political election process. To me, this is damage to who we are as a people. It's deeply damaging.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I'd like to thank you for your profound remarks that were just enthralling from start to finish. I really did enjoy tonight's lecture. At our age, I want to congratulate you for what I think we were both hoping will become the choir. You're preaching to what we hope will become the choir, but unfortunately, that says the choir is going to be necessary going down the road. The policy problems are not going to go away because they're constantly going to be generated by the non-racists, as we'll call them, on the other side. So what can be done to reduce the constant policy pressures which we want these folks to resist?
So this is an intriguing question because, you know, a lot of the power of Donald Trump seems to me comes from the fact that he has a Twitter account, has the bully pulpit. We in the news business, the journalists, we feel obligated to report on what he has to say, who he's attacking, and then their response and the back and forth. Again, distracted, gaslighted, whatever, by this hand, while this hand's doing the actual damage. To my mind, the great hope for this generation, young people here at Dillard, is that they would be smarter and aware in order to make their own conclusions. And I think their number one conclusion should be, I've got to be politically active. There's no excuse anymore. There's no excuse for saying, oh, politics is confusing or boring, or, you know, I went to school because I want to make some money, I want a good job, I want to be able to say to my mom and dad when I get back home, yeah, I got good grades at Dillard, now I'm off to make some money to make you proud. No, part of their future has to be, Mom and Dad, I understand what people did in prior generations that made it possible for me to stand where I stand today. And I am going to be involved in politics. I am going to volunteer and work with political organizations. I am going to dig in my pocket, and I don't have much, but I'm going to dig in my pocket and I'm going to make contributions to political candidates. And I may not have a whole lot of time, but I'm going to write letters to the editor. I'm going to write my own pieces at times about what's going on in the world, and I'm going to put them either on a blog or I'm going to put them in a magazine. I'm going to submit them somewhere because I want people to know what I'm seeing with my own eyes and what's going on. I'm not just going to leave it to others to tell the tale, but I know that my life has meaning. My time on this earth is something of a gift, and I want to make sure that that gift has a legacy, an ongoing power. And the only way that my life can have power is if I put my life and trust into other people and their lives, and trying to lift them up so that they too can understand what I've done when their generation has an opportunity to go even farther. So for me, when I'm talking to a group of young people, I want them to understand the power they have in their lives and the difference they can make. That they don't have to fall subject to a Donald Trump. They don't have to fall subject to anybody. That they're smart, capable, strong, and they've got to raise their voices. Because if they choose to remain silent, to me, they're turning their back not just on history, not just on family, they're turning their back on God.
President Trump has been defined, perhaps in the arena of mental health, as a malignant narcissist. You made some remarks about meaningfulness, and my comment and question is this. I think this is an existential moment we find ourselves living in. I'm also reminded of the philosopher Soren Kierkegaard, whose
You
famous
must have been a
quote,
philosophy major.
his famous quote is that life must be lived forward, but can only be understood backward. And so, thinking back, many of us here tonight, well, not all say, let me back up with that statement. Some of us here tonight are old enough to remember President Richard Milhouse Nixon and his policies and how his policies affected America, particularly Black America. Seems to me some of us have seen this movie before and don't want to see this movie again. My question to you, Brother Williams, is this. When we reflect on moving forward, but yet looking back, that hope unborn, why would we be concerned in this moment when clearly we have this faith that things will work out? So knowing that things will work out and being engaged in the process, political process and otherwise, why should we in this moment perhaps be conflicted, be compelled to move, to act, when in fact history shows us that ultimately life does work out and we end up living a very meaningful life?
Wow. So my faith is great. I sense from your question, yours is as well. But my sense is that while, that famous quote, I think Obama loved it so much from Dr. King, the arc of justice is long, but it bends towards, the arc of history is long, but it bends towards justice. You have to understand that that bend may not come in your lifetime. You have to understand that there's a hand, and not just a mystical, righteous hand, bending that arc, making things possible. And if you choose to simply rely on blind faith, I'm reminded of that saying, God helps those who help themselves. Yes. And that if you somehow decide, I'm just going to lay here and I'm going to I've got my education, I'm going to do okay, not going to be a big problem, you may be surprised the day they come to get you. And then, it'll be like the Jews in Germany who thought, they may have gotten the people over there, but they ain't coming over here. And at that point, the arc of history may bend in the future, but by that time, you will have a bowl full of sorrow and tears and regret at what you did not do. and your inaction will be not only a stain on your life, but it will be a curse on your generations that come after you. And I think, again, you talked about narcissism at the start of your question. I think we, even as we might say that he's a malignant narcissist, we have to guard against our own narcissism, thinking that it's okay. Because the great accomplishments of the civil rights movement was, one, the creation of a black middle class, but two, black political voice and power. And if you take these things for granted, they will wither. If you don't water them, if you don't nourish them, if you don't nurture them, they will wither and die. And I would hate for us to say, you know, I didn't think that would happen. To me, that would be so tragic. Such a loss. Don't let it happen. As Donald Trump would say, sad. Very sad.
Thank you. You're welcome.
Good evening, Mr. Williams. My name is Marsha Grady Gonzalez. I'm not one of the young people here at Dillard, as so many are in the audience, but I do appreciate Dillard's forethought in presenting this lecture series to the community, a part I am a part of. I am a graduate of 1975 University of New Orleans here in Louisiana. But what I want to say is, to my mind, from what I understand, this base in which the person presently is seated in the seat in the White House caters to is in the minority. What I'm struggling to understand is how did we get to this point? How did that man get in there? I'm struggling with how we got where we are following the 8 years previous.
You know, this to me is the number one question. I look at it all the time in terms of the politics, because I'm struck that it's close to 90% of Republicans support Donald Trump. And even after the midterms, when Democrats have done very well, you look at it and it's about 40% of the American people approve of Donald Trump. And I'm saying to myself, how can you approve of someone who behaves in this way, but forget the behavior, who speaks in this way, this bullying, this kind of race baiting, this kind of anti-Semitism that he encourages in the country? Why would you support such a person? It just doesn't make sense to me. And yet, that's the reality. That's what we're dealing with. And to my mind, again, you know, you're saying, how did we get here? I think there are moments of anxiety and fear that we all experience, where we think, you know, the world is changing too quickly, or we are getting left behind, or no one understands what I'm dealing with, and it's only those elites that are doing so well on the East Coast, on Wall Street, or on the West Coast in Hollywood, but what's happening to me? And we're all subject, black, white, brown, Asian, we're all subject to the idea that some other tribe or group or racial identity has the upper hand or is gaining the upper hand. And all of those appeals, well, they remind me of, I think it was Dr. King who talked about feeding people the bread of hate. In other words, they're hungry, but they want to know that they are better than somebody else, or that there's somebody else to blame. And I think that Donald Trump, with support from the Russian hackers, was able to perpetrate this idea that Hillary Clinton should be locked up and was a criminal and was a deceitful elitist who condescend and look down on people and call people despicables, even when people were engaged in despicable behavior and she was speaking directly and honestly. But somehow she became the villain in the popular telling of the tale. And so suddenly then, it was lock her up, and it was a choice between this celebrity, billionaire, New York developer and the much hated villain, Wicked Witch of the West, Hillary Clinton, and that there's some people, unfortunately, specifically in states like Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania, by a very thin margin cast their votes, and the Electoral College don't know anybody who predicted that he was going to win. And I'm in the business. Michael Moore, but he's not in the business. So I don't know anybody who's a professional in terms of the polling and the like who predicted that he was going to win. Actually, there is one professor at American University in D.C., but that man also predicts, I think this goes to your question, that Trump will be impeached. But I don't know. But anyway, my point was generally, I don't know anybody who anticipated he was going to win. So when you ask tonight, you don't understand how he won. Let me tell you, a lot of people don't understand what happened, except to say that he appealed to the most base instincts of voters, some of them, ironically, people who voted for Obama twice, but then felt, given the kind of rhetoric and the racially divisive appeals that he was making, that why not elect the great disruptor, Donald Trump? Well, I think that they have seen disruption, but the disruption, especially for us here tonight, is so damaging, so costly, just shocking.
All right.
I'm gonna let Mr. Williams go on out with India. So, like I said, you have a book. So if you want to get it signed, you can do that. Let me just make a couple of quick announcements. Let me ask Jalen and Renee to stand up, our students, and I'll come back to Jalen. Jalen and Renee, if you all will stand up. And then Jalen, who did our opening prayer, who got a shout out from the speaker. That's always good. You have in your program the series sponsors. I want to thank them. They continue to do a good job. The last speaker for this semester is James Foreman Jr. He's a law professor at Yale who just won the Nobel Prize for nonfiction. His book is called Locking Up Our Own, Crime and Punishment in Black America. So that's our Ortiz lecture that focuses on law and society. Those of you who might not know, the first African American on the Louisiana Supreme Court, Justice Rebus Ortiz, is a graduate of Dillard University. So we do an annual lecture in his honor. And so having Professor Foreman is going to be really good. And then 2019 is officially our 150th anniversary. So the highlighted brain food speakers will be alums. The King lecture or King service will be Pat Watson from Watson Family Ministries. She'll preach that night. We're actually going to do it on January 15th, Tuesday the 15th, which is his actual birthday. In February, there's a CBS show called The Doctors. If you're familiar with them, well, one of them, Dr. Nita Landry, is a Dillard alum. So she's going to be here for that one. And then in March, you heard mentioned Lisa Frazier Page, who is a journalist and New York Times bestselling author. She will be here in March to do that. So we're excited about that. And then we've got one set up for the fall as well. So if you have your book, go get it signed. There are probably a couple extras. If you want to grab one for a friend, this is like low-key Christmas gift for somebody. Because I get an extra one for my dad, because my dad loves books. So I can get an extra one for my dad for Christmas. So if you want to get an extra book, do that too. Because like I said, Juan Williams bought the books. So they're free. So if you know somebody who really likes to read, get you another book. Okay? I'll see y'all later. Thank you.